let's start by reading the first half of Matthew for the third time, the first half of the Olivet Discourse for the third time, and then let's read the corresponding part in Luke and Mark. So let's start at the very beginning of chapter 24 and not at the end of chapter 23. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the close of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of war. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of the sufferings. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get a coat. And alas, for those who are with child and for those who are nursing in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. And if those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Behold, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Behold, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with the loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And we can stop there. So let's look at corresponding passages in the other two synoptics. That's Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 31.
Say that one again.
Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 31. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." Jesus just has to be a Debbie Downer. And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign when these things are all to be accomplished?" And Jesus began to say to them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of war, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the sufferings. But take heed to yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear testimony before them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. And when they bring you to trial and deliver you up, do not be anxious beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And brother will deliver up brother to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything away. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get a coat. And alas, for those who are with child and for those who are nursing in those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never will be. And if the Lord had not shortened the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. False Christs and false prophets will arise and show signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed, I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gate. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Then the corresponding, so they're very similar. Aside from the clear glee of the disciple pointing out the buildings of the temple, which is kind of funny.
And he's also more detailed on what's going to happen to the apostles.
Uh-huh. Then the corresponding passage in Luke is chapter 21, verses 5 through 33. As some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, "As for these things which you see, the days will come when there shall not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And they asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign when this is about to take place?" And he said, "Take heed." So notice there's really a single question there.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Take heed that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and 'the time is at hand.' Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for this must first take place, but the end will not be at once." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be a time for you to bear testimony. Settle it therefore in your minds, not to meditate beforehand how to answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and kinsmen and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your lives. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies," notice, by armies, not by the abomination of desolation, "then know that its desolation has come near." So Jerusalem left desolate, Jerusalem's desolation has come near. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Alas for those who are with child and for those who are nursing in those days. For great distress shall be upon the earth and wrath upon this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations. And Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, look up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." And then he told them a parable. "Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they come out in leaf, you see for yourselves and know that the summer is already near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all this has taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So in Luke, it's much more explicit that what he's talking about is the destruction of the temple. So we left last week with the question of how many questions are there and where is the dividing line of the questions. So obviously, if we think that there's one question, then the entire Olivet Discourse is about that one question. If we think it's two or three questions, what are the dividing points?
I think one is, tell us, when will this be? One question. What will be the sign of your coming? Another, and the close of the age.
Mm-hmm. And where in
Yeah,
the
I think
Olivet
there's three
Discourse?
questions.
Pardon?
I
What's
think there are three questions.
you, you think? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
what, Carmen?
I agree. I think there are three questions.
So where are the dividing points for them?
I'll be right.
And conjunction.
What conjunction?
Okay, so it says tell us when will this be, and what will be the sign of
Oh,
your coming.
right. No, that's not what I meant. I meant so there are either two or three questions, or uh, and so where. So then Jesus answers them in the starting in verse 4. So where are the questions answered in the remainder of the Olivet Discourse?
Well, okay, so what will be the sign of your coming? They say that he'll be coming in the clouds, right? The Son of Man will be returning in the clouds.
That's a possible interpretation.
Well, the verse 29 said the title for that area is the coming of the Son of Man.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of a separate issue.
Uh-huh. Although the question is, where is he coming?
Well, it says, when is he coming? Yeah.
And where is he coming? Or where is he
And
going?
it doesn't say that.
Well, no, it doesn't say that. That's to be figured out.
Yeah.
That's an issue.
Well, and then there's the thing that God has no timeline like we do. So how do we know that we're not still in that timeline
What timeline?
where um where we're still waiting for his return?
We are.
Oh, we are still waiting for his return.
Oh, good. Okay,
That's
because I thought you said that it would have all this took place already when the temple was destroyed.
uh, yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, that's true.
So after that, I
At the
think we're
hour
still
we
at that
don't
time.
know. Yeah.
I think we're still in that time. after the
Um,
temple was destroyed.
uh-huh.
It's that God didn't, God didn't specify what year it would be. So now we've got all these speculations, that it might be a 2,000-year term.
And it wasn't.
It wasn't at the year 2000, but it could be
2030.
2033
Yeah.
or 2070.
Um, so,
If that's when the temple was, destroyed.
so,
But the
so,
church era happened when Christ died on the cross.
yeah.
Yeah. And the theme of the question is funny because he asks, like, they're talking about Jerusalem, right? And when Jerusalem gonna be destroyed. And then they say, like, wait, when this gonna happen? Because, like, when Jerusalem destroyed in their head, that's the end of the world. Right? It's like that's the end. When Jerusalem like is destroyed, there is nothing else to after that. And they're like, when that's gonna happen, and then when it's gonna be then, like, what is the sign of the end of the world? Like, looks like two different questions, like not two different
Well,
questions, but like Jerusalem gonna be destroyed, and then it's gonna be the end of everything.
well, they are two different questions because they're although the focus has changed somewhat. So the initial question is based on his saying, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." So the immediate question is, given that they've just commented on the beauty of the buildings and they're puzzled by the contrast between the beauty of the buildings and how could these be left desolate. So the immediate question is about that. And so when will this be refers to the not one stone. But then Jesus had also before that said, I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
So he's adding another layer of confusion to them.
It's yeah, so now they're asking about that, but they changed the word for come, and they what will be the sign of your coming? For coming, they use the word parousia, and that typically refers to the second coming. So um, inadvertently, they're asking two questions that aren't necessarily joined together in time, right? So they're asking about when are the stones going to be thrown down and when are you returning? And so then Jesus begins answering them. The so if we think that there is simply a single question, as some Catholics and uh, most evangelicals do, then the entire Olivet Discourse, chapters 24 and 25, becomes about the second coming. We think that there are two questions, then two dividing points have been proposed. The first is Jesus answers the first question in starting in chapter 24, verse 4, and ends his answer in chapter 24, verse 35, with heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. The second uh, division is proposed by both Chrysostom and uh, um, um, Theophylact. It goes from verse 4 through verse 22 refers to the destruction of the temple, and then 23 on to the end of the Olivet Discourse refer to the second coming. And then the three questions have been proposed by Jerome, but he's very mixed in terms of, so most of the beginning of the Olivet Discourse refers to the destruction of the temple, and then subsequent passages refer either to the destruction of the temple or to the second coming or to both. So he's not clear on aside from some passages that refer only to the destruction of the temple, which one refers to both. So those are, the basic arguments. So what I would argue is that the entire, I would go with the first one of those, that everything from verse 5 through verse 35 refer to the destruction of the temple, and everything from 36 on refers to the second coming. So let's begin. So there are a couple of remarks. First, and actually, unfortunately, I didn't do a proper word study here, but have largely depended on Saint Jerome, who argues that, so in verse 8, Jesus says, "This is the beginning of the sufferings." Some translations have, "This is the beginning of the tribulation," and some translations have, "This is the beginning of the birth pangs." And Jerome argues that birth pangs is a superior translation. And
What does that mean, superior translation?
more accurately reflects the intent of the text. So this is the beginning of the birth pangs, so it's the early onset of labor. So the significant thing about birth pangs, obviously, is that something is given birth, right? So it's a process of a creation of a new thing. In the case of birth, a new being from the body of its mother. So the living is the source of a new life, right? So there's continuity there. There's also discontinuity because it's a new life that's not identical to the mother in a number of respects. Genetically, it's distinct, and it's an infant as opposed to an adult at a bare minimum.
And it's a different generation.
And it's a different generation. So the second coming cannot be described as a process of birth. In Christian theology, there's no attempt to define the continuities and discontinuities that separate the church age from the second coming, drawing on traditional Christian theology, not evangelical Christian theology. So the use of birth pang is a significant one. It indicates that whatever happens is going to have continuities and discontinuities with the present rather than being, so the second coming is really God's coming in judgment, God's restoration of creation. And fundamentally, God intervenes in a way that redefines creation. So it's not continuous with what's gone before. The travails of this world don't produce the next. The movement is simply from God to restore his world.
What
So,
did you say? God will redefine.
what?
God will redefine what?
Redefine creation.
That's it. Okay. I couldn't, all of a sudden I went blank.
Uh-huh. So birth pangs is extremely significant.
Where is that? The term birth pangs. I was trying to find it.
It depends on what your translation says. It's in verse 8. This is this is but the beginning of the sufferings. This is but the beginning of the tribulation, or this is but the beginning of the birth pangs.
Oh, there it is. Okay. And mine says sufferings. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, mine says suffering too. The New Revised Standard Translation has birth pangs. So he says this is but the beginning of the sufferings of the birth pangs. So it's an image of the early onset of labor, right? It's then followed by the intensification, which is discussed in verses 9 through 14. Then they will put you to death. And then the process of birth in verses 15 through 35. So let's take a look at the Jesus response in detail. So the first thing he warns, so take heed that no one leads you astray. So he's concerned, first of all, with false messiahs, with people who claim that they are the Messiah and they are the Christ. Many will come in my name saying, I am the Messiah. So Jesus clearly identifies himself as the true Messiah, which we know, and warns against others who claim to be. So what's significant is that there were any number of pretenders for the Messiahship during this period. There are two of them documented in Acts chapter 5. Let's take a look at Acts, actually. Verses 35 through 39.
Sorry, which chapter, Ron?
5.
5? Thank you.
Uh-huh. So in verse 33 it says, when they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in honor by all the people, stood up and ordered the men to be put outside for a while. And he said to them, men of Israel, take care what you do with these men. For before these days, Theudas arose, claiming to be somebody. So Theudas is one of the false messiahs, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. But he was slain, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean, so another Messiah, arose in the days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He also perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of men, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So he mentions two of the pretenders and uses their failure to indicate that they couldn't possibly be the Messiah, whereas the disciples have continued to persist. Then Acts 8, verse 10 mentions Simon the Samaritan. Josephus mentions Judas the Galilean, Simon the Samaritan. He mentions someone named Athronges, who's a shepherd, and he mentions a number of robbers in Judea. Then he also mentions Theudas, and Theophylact mentions that there was a Samaritan named Dositheus who claimed to be the prophet foretold by Moses, which would be the Messiah. So, what can all of these people be called?
False messiahs.
What might be another name for false Messiah?
Impersonators.
Anything else?
Identity thieves.
In modern lingo, yeah.
Yeah.
False gods.
Liars.
Anything else?
Satan.
Anything else?
We can't be here the whole night, bro. Just throwing it. Huh?
How about antichrists?
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a good one.
We will eventually get there.
So one of the interesting things, is that the Antichrist is seen as a future figure, right? But actually, the Antichrist isn't a future figure.
He's not.
It's not. Let's take a look at 1 John chapter 2, verse 18.
Sorry, what was the chapter again? First John what?
1 John chapter 2, verse 18.
Thank you, Ron.
First John. I still can't find First John. Oh, there it is. Chapter 2, verse 18.
Verse 18.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Antichrist.
Children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. Therefore we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that it might be plain that they all are not of us. So the Antichrist, many Antichrists have come. And also chapter 1 John chapter 4, verse 3. Actually start at verse 1. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are of God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit which confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit which does not confess Jesus is not of God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, of which you have heard that it was coming, and now it is in the world already. So Antichrist is in the world. Antichrist is not future.
So when was this book written? Like First John? That is John. The
Yeah,
author is John, the disciple, right?
right.
Okay. And that was before he goes to the exile or after?
It's it's hard to say. It depends on how you date it. It's it's probably after.
Okay.
Well, the Bible says, in the Bible at the beginning, it says that it's the first epistle of John since apostolic times. Although in more recent years it has been proposed that one John the Elder was the author of all three canonical
Canonical.
epistles ascribed to St. John. So I don't know.
So that argument that it was written by John the Elder is not John the Apostle. So I mean, I don't think that. At least I don't find the I don't find the argument convincing, and um, we have all of these stray Johns.
It does say tradition remains strong, however, that it was the apostle who wrote the gospel,
Yeah.
and at least the first of the three epistles bearing his name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, yeah. And the tone seems to be very consistent with what church tradition tells about John, especially late in his life. There's a certain gentleness that pervades and a predominance of the message that we should love one another. So there was so the according to church tradition, at the end of his life, John would be carted in on a bed or a stretcher, and since he was an apostle and was venerated and enormously admired, people would ask him for to say something, and the only thing he would ever say was, "We should love one another." So, um, so Jerome argues that all heresiarchs, so propounders of heresy, are antichrists and teach things in the name of Christ that are contrary to Christ. It is not surprising that we see some seduced by them, since the Lord said, "And they will seduce many." So, an antichrist is someone who, either claims to be Christ, claims to be the Messiah, or propounds false teachings that contradict those of Jesus. So here we have false messiahs. So that was true of the period before the destruction of the temple. And during the destruction of the temple, each of the factions within Jerusalem believed that they were anointed by God, that they were protected by God, and that God would guarantee them the victory. So that's basically sign one, false messiahs. And you will hear of wars and rumors of war. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. What do you make of wars and rumors of war from a prophetic point of view?
Ron, can I make a question regarding the antichrist? I know you already moved the page on the
Uh-huh.
antichrist, but so if antichrist was a definition that was like already present at the time,
Mm-hmm.
can we still like say that those people that teach stuff against Jesus teaching, or yeah, are they the antichrist too, or no? That's a definition like there was in the past.
That's a good question. Uh, um, the I think um,
Hmm.
I guess I'm searching for a politically correct answer. I guess my definition would be how how severe is their heresy, or how far from the teachings of Christ does their teaching depart. So, um, and to what degree does it result in a complete distortion? So, given that as disciples of Christ, our responsibility is to imitate Christ, and where, sort of based on when we fail to do that, not so much based on our own personal, you know, issues or shortcomings or failures, but when we fail to do that based on our theology and our understanding of Scripture, then we're fundamentally denying the teachings of Christ and replacing them with something else. And that is certainly the activity of the Antichrist. So I would, argue that probably that, the doctrine of justification by faith alone, and even less that than, the notion that I'm saved and I have this, ticket punched to heaven, is precisely that, is a heresy that denies Christ. It denies Christ's teaching. The rapture, I would say, denies Christ's teaching. So the answer, I think, is, it sort of depends on the severity of the heresy, or of the violation or departure from Christ's teaching.
Okay. Makes sense.
That was a good question. Thank you.
So, wars and rumors of war, what about that as a sign of something? It's frequently taken as a sign of the second coming. When you hear of wars and rumors of war, then you know the second coming is approaching.
I
What's
think it's
wrong?
talking about the coming of the Roman army.
How do we know that?
Well, historically, weren't the Romans the ones that destroyed Jerusalem from without, while the different factions were destroying it from within?
Right, but so for example, if I in my role as prophet saying, "Thus says the Lord," when you hear of wars and rumors of war, the second coming is at hand. What's wrong with that statement?
Well, we hear rumors of war and war all the time. There have been many wars and many rumors of war over the ages,
Exactly.
and
Anyone
Christ
who
still hasn't come.
anyone who thinks that that's a prophecy of the second coming should be probably stoned as a false prophet. Right? There are always wars and there are always rumors of war. Even if we narrow our boundaries to our own nation, America is usually at war. And if it's not actually at war, and I can't think of any period in recent memory when it hasn't been at war, then there's always the threat of war somewhere. So So, what's significant about the period during which Jesus speaks about wars and rumors of war? Does anyone know? What is this period called in Roman history?
Oh,
It starts with Augustus, Pax Romana,
okay. Pax Romana.
the Roman peace. The
I didn't
world.
know there was a peace in Rome.
What?
I didn't know there was a peace full time.
The world is at peace,
Uh-huh.
the civilized world. Right? So peace means really not the absence of war, but the fact that all opponents have been beaten down and have lost the ability to resist. So peace is established through the threat of military force. So, in part, so there are actually rebellions throughout this period. And there's a problem with banditry throughout this period. There's a major rebellion in Britain in the 60s. And then in 66, there's a war. The Roman, well, in 66, the Roman troops sent to um, enforce sacrifices in the temple are end up retreating from Jerusalem and are slaughtered on their way out, and then the garrison is slaughtered. So there are wars and rumors of war. So And then also, in some sense, Jesus is also saying that underneath the supposed tranquility of Pax Romana, there's really unrest, and to a degree, Pax Romana is is a farce. So you can really only say, that there that you can use wars and rumors of war as a prophetic sign in a period when there's supposed to be peace. And that's really the only period, probably in all of human history, when the world, meaning, the civilized world, was supposed to be at peace. So that second sign, wars and rumors of war, is very unique to the period in which Jesus lives, to the destruction of the temple. Then third, there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. So there was a famine in Rome in 41 and 42. There's a famine in Judea, which in fact may have been part of an empire-wide famine in 45. That's mentioned by Paul in Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. It's also mentioned in Acts chapter 11. There's a famine in Greece in about 50. There was a famine in Rome again in 52. There were a number of notable earthquakes. The city of Colossae was totally destroyed in the 50s or the 60s. Colossae is the city to which, the church there, Paul wrote Colossians. And Pompeii was totally destroyed by an earthquake and volcano in 63.
What was that?
Pompeii.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So, two more signs, famines and earthquakes. Next, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And once again, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. There's an element of, sort of perpetual prophecy there, that people's love grows cold. And unfortunately, that's true of very many Christians, that their love has grown cold and they've sort of become, routine Christians, or Christianity has become about what they get out of it. But previously, so Jesus has mentioned persecution before. He's mentioned it, and remember in the missionary discourse in chapter 10, he's mentioned it in chapter 16. He's mentioned it in the last chapter. Um, there, the discussion of persecution was, in some sense, impersonal, right? It wasn't especially you who are the objects of persecution, but here it becomes very personal. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Then many will fall away and betray one another. Um, what we see clearly um, from the from both Luke and Mark is they talk about being taken before governors and kings, right? And so persecution is going to be not only of the Sanhedrin, by the Sanhedrin and by the synagogue, but it's also going to be by the state. So Acts discusses some of the synagogue and Sanhedrin persecution. Generally, persecutions tended to be local during this period outside of the Holy Land. But what was really distinctive is that the first sort of major persecution of Christians by the state and by the emperor occurred under Nero in 67, when I'm sorry, in 64. It lasted from 64 to 67. So it was remember, Rome burned. Something like 2/3 of Rome burned down, and Nero blamed the Christians and began an empire-wide Christian persecution, which ended when Nero's attention was diverted by the rebellion in Judea and the beginning of the Jewish War in 67. And then Nero committed suicide in 68. So there was persecution, and there was a movement from simply Jewish persecution of Jewish Christians to empire-wide persecution and blaming Christians for the ills of the empire, which becomes a very common theme afterwards, particularly that Christians are blamed for everything that's going wrong and for the disintegration of the empire because they refuse to worship Roman gods who are wrathful and pouring out their wrath on everybody because they're displeased. So the fifth sign is the persecution, and that's fulfilled. And we're out of time. So why don't we stop there and pick up with the sixth sign, which is apostasy. followed by the seventh, the gospel preached worldwide, and Daniel's desolating sacrilege. And see how those do or don't fit into the destruction of the temple.